Hello, welcome. It's Coach and the Commentator with Jon Crispin. I'm ESPN college basketball analyst Jon Crispin. He is brother Joe, head coach of Rowan University men's basketball. We usually kind of dig into a quick topic, hot topic, before we get into whatever it is we want to talk about. I don't know exactly what you want to talk about, so I'm going to talk about something first. It's kind of how this goes. I just got done doing Pac-12 radio, and I found it really interesting because the two teams we talked about a lot in terms of almost the most outside of Arizona was UCLA and USC. We had the voice of USC basketball on. We had a reporter that covers UCLA, and you can't help but to start asking questions about whatever it is. Like, there's the season that's going on, but then there's the next season. But also for football, they just had signing day, which was apparently like a not a very big signing day anymore. Like it's not really, you're not signing your best kids then, but still signing day nonetheless. So the question became like, how do you recruit for the Big Ten if you haven't really played there yet? And I thought that would be a good one to pose to you as we kind of kick this off. Like, whether you're Lincoln Riley, Chip Kelly, Andy Enfield or Mick Cronin, there's got to be a part of you that's recruiting for where you're going to play. So you do, in a way, have to understand how the game's going to be played there. Like, how much are you putting into recruiting to compete in the conference? How well do you know the Big Ten before you get there? Because obviously you should be talking about it now when you're recruiting.
That's a good question.
That's why I wanted to ask it.
Yeah, and it is probably something people won't consider enough. How dramatic a shift has to take place. Now, I also would say I think there's some positives to it, in that I would like them to change the Big Ten a little bit, probably in basketball and maybe football, right? Is bring a little more wide open style in both sports.
So, i.e., don't adapt too much.
Yeah, be the different team, be the West Coast team. Because listen, the Pac-12 is a different brand of basketball than the Big Ten.
How would you describe the Pac-12 though? Because I think it's easier to describe the SEC and the ACC, the Big East, the Big 12, the Big 10. I feel like it's just easier. Like, a lot of times people say, well, Big 10's got the best coaching and the best older players. The ACC has the best players, the best talent. The SEC has the best athletes. The Big 12 is a hodgepodge of all of it. And in a way, so is the Big East. But what is the Pac-12? Like, how would you describe the way the Pac-12 is played?
I don't think it's completely like this, but I do think it's a little less physical. I mean, I know it's a little less physical than the Big Ten.
I got 4 fouls in my first game, and I played like 12 minutes.
Yeah, it's way different. Yeah. And it's a little more free-flowing because of that. Length. I think of length. I think of athleticism. I think of some pretty good skill. I mean, Arizona is a great scoring team, right? They spread you out. They play NBA-style basketball, or actually Europe.
A lot of European. No, they have a lot of Europeans.
So, I think it's a little more free-flowing of a game. When I think, if you just take Arizona, for example, who I'm more familiar with, UCLA, similar, though Cronin's got a little more of that.
He's already a little Big Ten in him. Like,
he'll fit in fine.
Yeah.
But like, if you just took Arizona and planted them in the Big Ten, who's going to adjust?
Yeah.
I hope it wouldn't be Arizona. I'd want more people to be like Arizona. One of the things I argue about the Big Ten is that somebody needs to come along and win multiple years scoring a lot.
Yeah.
That will change the Big Ten, and then go win a national title or go to a Final Four. That'll change the Big Ten.
That's why it's almost like Iowa needs to do something in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, and they haven't. Even when they had Garza and got upset like that, that hurt the Big Ten. That hurt the Big Ten in more ways than you think. So I'm hoping that UCLA and USC can bring some of that free-flowing nature to things in probably basketball and football, frankly, because I think football is pretty similar. You're also talking about, even though geography doesn't matter as much anymore with recruiting, it does. And it does, especially in the Big Ten. And there is just different styles of ball in different places, right? So if you have to recruit Wisconsin, for example, you're probably not going to press for 40 minutes. Now, I could argue that they could be good at that too, but that's a whole nother conversation. But I think that's just a good launch. It's a good thing for people to consider because you just assume, right? Anytime you go to a new place, you have to do, I think you'd have to do a historical study and kind of an
Similar to
identity
what we
study.
talked about last time.
Yeah, so you
with
need to do a
identity.
study on like the program itself, the place, all this other stuff. Then you got to study your opponents, right? So if I were to be at a new school tomorrow, that's one of the first things I'd be doing besides understanding the place and the people and the history, and what's worked in the past. It's who do I have to play the most, right? What conference do I have to win to get to the NCAA tournament if it's a mid-major? What conference do I have to compete in to get in, in the Big Ten right now? It's like the top 8, right? You had UCLA, you'd be the top 10. How can I be in the top 10 of the Big Ten? I'll make the NCAA tournament. But the crux of this, and this is a conversation we've had a lot of times, is you can win the Big Ten and decrease your chances of winning in the tourney. Because you're beat up and because you've adopted a style that helps you win the Big Ten that doesn't help you win 5-6 games in March. Madness. And I think that's a mistake. And I think that we've seen that, right? Especially with like defensive low scoring teams. You're going to run into a buzzsaw in the NCAA tournament of talent players. You're going to lose, and you're going to lose 75 to 65. And you're going to wonder why. It's because you've been scoring 64 and winning the whole season. You've gotten used to thinking 64 is enough. It's not, So I'm hoping they bring in some stuff, but I think there will still have to be some adjustments. And I bet you there are going to be some complaints. The one thing that USC and UCLA, if I'm them, I'm going to go, what in the world is this? Because they can say that they can say it's, we're calling it. No, you're not. No, you're not. Watch your games. You're not calling it the way they are. And even if you're trying to call it, the teams themselves just historically play more physical basketball. Well, you get these tall, skinny dudes from UCLA and USC and bring them out to Purdue, and they're going to go, what in the world is this when they have to play at Michigan State or whatever? So there is an adjustment, but I hope it will help the conference itself and that UCLA doesn't turn into Wisconsin basketball.
It's interesting. Earlier in the week when I was on Sirius XM, it was Big Ten Radio. We had Brad Taylor on. Brad Taylor's a VP for basketball at the Big Ten Conference, or VP at the Big Ten Conference, oversees basketball. And he's new on the job. I think he's only 3 or 4 months on the job. And one of the questions I asked him, I was like, how are you addressing style of play when it comes to looking at Big Ten teams and their struggles? I said, and I kind of made it light by saying, look, Jim Boeheim was so polite to point out some of the Big Ten struggles in the NCAA tournament. And I said, how are you addressing style of play when it comes to the NCAA tournament? Like the Big Ten, they assimilate to one another, and then you get to the NCAA tournament, and that's not the style or the brand that wins. And it was funny. Like, I think he's probably too new on the job to really get into that, because he said, look, it's not really our place to tell coaches how to play. And mine was, I was like, well, it's not telling coaches how to play. It's almost changing their constraints, right? Because that goes back to the point you were making, where the rules ultimately allow the game to be played this way. How would you change it? Like, you're saying you want UCLA and USC to impact that change, but how would you change it? If you were to say, I want to get more pace in our conference games, what do you do if you can't change the rules?
I would lose with more pace, at least at first. You have to prove you're willing to lose with more pace before you get good enough players to win with more pace. That's actually the one thing. Is that, and that's harder to do at that level. I get it, right? It's
harder
easy
to keep a job that way.
It was easier for me to do it rowing. That's why you have to be a little bit desperate, right? Or you have to be different and recognize, if you're UCLA and you're USC, we can get, different, better athletes. Maybe, some of these teams that they've had recently, they got really skilled players, right? And
look at the Mobley brothers at USC. They were different.
UCLA is very skilled too. They had a good game against. I think the thing that people don't understand is, when it comes to the Big Ten, there's a volume effect. It's not just UCLA could show up right now and beat Michigan State or beat Illinois or whatever. But it's when you got to go from Illinois to Michigan State to Ohio State to, Rutgers, and then you got to go to Penn State. And then it's like, you're just like, what in the world is this? It wears you out, right? So it's like,
especially when you consider the ease of the Pac-12 travel schedule where you have travel partners. So USC and
I agree with that.
UCLA go up to Washington and Washington State. They play the Washingtons. And I think this is all stuff I did. You play the Washingtons, then you come home, and then maybe you only play USC on Wednesday night, and then you have a break on the weekend. You're not getting that ever in the Big Ten.
I think the Big Ten needs to look at that, and they might with the addition. But yeah, like we talked about it on the radio show with Kevin Willard talking about the Big Ten schedule, and he was completely right. He was completely right. It's literally unfair. The TV that's TV's generating this schedule that is just ridiculous. Like it's unfair for Maryland to have to do what they did in the early January.
Well, it's not going to get any easier. Fox and Peacock and all these others just spent $1 billion. It's not going to get any easier. There's no way with games on nearly every single night that the schedule's going to be fair. If you're trying to fill up games Monday through Sunday, there's no way. It's going to be unfair for somebody.
True. Unless you went with that kind of partnership and there was at least some rhythm for the specific team.
Ooh,
right?
You're almost working into segue category right now.
So, but I think
mentioned rhythm.
Yeah, really. I think that's an interesting. I just think that's a larger topic of program building.
Yeah,
that people probably don't realize how difficult that is, because even for me as Division III coach, I played 18 conference games, right? And Lord willing, we play in the semifinals and finals. That's 20 times out of my 25 to 27 games. It's 27 including playoffs if we do that. So I only get 7 out of conference games. Now that's less than a Division I schedule would be. Well, I'm not stupid, but I also want to beat the best teams in the country and give myself a chance. Yeah. Well, I have to balance out that desire to play a style of ball that can win in the NCAA tournament. This is what I'm trying to do now. And that is harder than people think at any level, because you do still have to build a team that can withstand the Big Ten schedule, and you got to practice that way, and you got to do some things, and it's hard to go against the grain. You got to be a little bit desperate too. You got to be an underdog to do that as well.
You also have to have a very secure, both personally and also professionally, athletic director to say, hey, look, it's you don't ask me about how we're going to win. Let me tell you about how we're going to lose. That's almost the conversation you want to have. Yet not many people want to have that conversation. They all want to be sold on how you're going to win. But before we keep down this line, because I think this is something we could probably come back to, and I wrote down program building, which I think is different than building identity and culture. So it's a different conversation. It might be something we get to. But you mentioned the word rhythm, and something you wanted to get into today was kind of like managing a season. To me, it comes back to what I always talk about, whereas I said every season has its own rhythm, just like games have their own rhythm. And I always said this about the COVID year. I said that the problem with the COVID year is not just that players are separated and they're not having the normal college experience. It's that they don't have a normal build up to the season. So it's hard to identify and maintain or even find a season rhythm. How would you define a rhythm to the season as a coach?
I would say it depends. A lot of it depends. Right. It depends on how many returners you have. It depends on your expectations. It depends on really your strength of schedule. Right. I think there's a lot of factors to consider when it comes to rhythm, because, my perspective has always been I want my record to be great in February and March. But I have to be careful not to lose more games than I should in November.
Yeah, especially now in Division I, they're saying that we don't value who you are as of late as much anymore, which I think is the dumbest thing in the world. I'd rather take the best teams late.
Well, I think it is completely the dumbest thing in the world, because, within reason, how you do in the last month of the schedule shows how good a team you are. I mean, how many teams get to February second time around in the Big Ten or the Pac-12, and then they
even
lose?
More so today, because half these teams are new. With the transfer portal,
you don't know who you are. I mean, even for
February.
me, maybe the extreme example, right, was like we start the season 0-2, we're 18-3. figure it out.
Yeah.
Should I have been 0-2? Probably not. If I could have changed my game plan a little bit on the second game, I probably would have and won.
You did lose your first 2 games by last second threes, so
yeah. That happens. But I also have our best, most dominant offensive player hadn't played in 2 years.
It's true.
We had 2 other guys from the bench who haven't played in 2 years. So there are 3 guys in our rotation who are rusty.
How often do you get that at Division I? That's a Division III thing that nobody has any idea. Like
it's
you and
not
I.
everywhere.
So wait.
It's not
Let's
everywhere
go back
in
to this
D3,
though.
but that is us. I mean, every year I have a guy who's probably hasn't played the season before.
So let me mention a name, and maybe you can tell the story better than I do. Larry Bland. Tell the story.
Yeah. So Larry Bland was our dad's greatest player at Glassboro High School for sure. I went to Seton Hall on a scholarship. Redshirted the year, I think, that they went to the finals, if I remember correctly. Ran into some personal stuff, was out of school for years. And when I was at Penn State, I don't think you were there yet. I saw Larry in the Rowan Rec Center and asked him, "What are you doing?" He goes, "I'm playing." I said, "You're playing where?" And I'm playing here, 30 years old.
So I was 30 years old, right?
Yeah. And they were good that year. They were good. At one point, I think they were ranked. He was the 6th man for most of the year. And I think they were ranked number 1 in the country. That happens in Division III, right? There's no clock. People don't realize that there's no 5 years to complete 4. There's 10 semesters to compete 4 years, 4 seasons, which changes everything. So, if somebody drops out of school at 18 and comes back at 45, they could play basketball if they're good enough. Maybe I should look for that in some of the men's leagues I play in.
I think he was older than 30. So if you were in college, think about because this was mid 80s when Larry was playing for Dad.
He was about 30. Yeah, because it's probably like 98, 99, early in my Penn State career. So I think, people don't realize that, but I think almost every year I've had someone who, if I don't have someone who hasn't played at all the year before, now COVID, it was sometimes 2 years.
Yeah.
I have someone who really didn't play that much, right? And even if they practiced, but what I tell people is not playing somewhere is almost the same as not playing. It takes a bit to find your rhythm again and your identity and all this other stuff. And then the way we play, I told our players, like, if we watch our games from earlier in the year, we stink. We weren't good. Like defensively, we weren't even close to what we are right now. Offensively, we figured out offense pretty quick. But the way we play offense is so rhythm, matchup, don't call anything, let the ball find where it needs to go based, that's slow cooking. That takes slow cooking. Right. It takes time for guys to figure.
Well, you also have to live with more. You have to allow more mistakes.
Yeah, but you don't want to lose over allowing those mistakes. And now I also play defense that way, and I probably did lose that second game over that, to be honest with you. Our defense was bad, but it was also we were trying to get some really good things that have helped us right now. So I wish I hadn't lost that game, but and now we also were on the bus for 3.5 hours when we should have been 2:15, and we arrived late.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's stuff that happens like that in D3, but the point is, I always say to my players, like, I don't want to have to lose and learn early. I want to win and learn as much as I can. Well, I lost one more game than I wanted to, probably. Like if you had told me 19-2 instead of 18-3, I would have been like, yeah, okay. I thought that was reasonable. Like we had that potential. But I think what happens a lot of times is if you only go game to game, right? At least this is how I operate. If you only focus on game to game, you lose more than you should in February.
Yeah.
March is March, right? You got to be healthy. You got all this other stuff, right? We lost first round last year. We were unhealthy. We were missing 3 guys, and one of them
I was going to say
that game.
Two of your best players were out, right? There was the melee in the conference championship game, and you were out 2 of your best players.
And I had a sprained ankle and a bum knee.
That's right.
So that's the kind of stuff you can't control. But in terms of your your peak of identity and your clarity on your defense and clarity on your offense, and just your rhythm and your flow. I think people, even on a season with less game, like we have less games to do it. We get 2 scrimmages and we play. So these initial games early in the year, if somebody says, "Oh, well, are you going to do this?" I'm like, maybe.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure it out. The way the NBA would use some preseason games. Now the NBA uses their season different, but I think when you think about seasons, I was just thinking macro, micro, right? Like the big picture of who you want to be, and then the micro of like, there's a game tomorrow and I want to win it. It's tough, because if you get lost only in the micro game to game, I just think you run the risk of never reaching your full potential. Now my record maybe should have been better in some years in November, but I do take pride in it being better in February because you're focused on the big picture.
All right. So a lot of times you talk to coaches or you listen to their press conferences, which you know is not the truth, right? You say what you kind of have to say, right? Like the post-game press conference, what do you think about this, this, and this? You got this coming up, this looming in a couple of weeks, and they're like, well, we've got Sisters of the Poor next, and that's what we're focused on. And you're just like, no, you're not. Like, how do you describe, I don't want to say describe, but like, what do you see in that? There is truth to a focus on your next opponent,
there is truth
right?
in that.
But you also know as a coach, you are building, as we say, managing a season, developing, maintaining a rhythm to the season. There are things that you're building within your team that is not specific to your next opponent, right?
Yes, within reason. At the same time, I view it as we have our baseline stuff of what we do. How are we going to adjust what we do in minimal fashion to beat this team? Because like every team gives you a chance to learn something, right? So I was miserable last night because I didn't like how we won against our last place team. I give them credit. They're playing really hard.
Gave up 80 points to a team that scores 58 a game. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
I heard you on the sideline say, you turned to your team at one point and you're like, guys, they score 58 points a game and they got 32 with like 7 minutes left to play in the first half.
Now, I give them credit. They played. There was a couple guys who hit shots and I didn't know their names.
Yeah, they did hit shots.
And I was like, is that guy, can that guy shoot? And then the assistant coaches were like, not according to the stats, but he did tonight. So whatever, right? But I wouldn't expect the way we play, we're going to give up more points. It's about, it's like anybody else, points per possession, right? Like if it was 75, I wouldn't have cared. But, because we're going to score over 100. But the point being, even that team, I try to make the connection. This team here tonight is playing defense in a way and offense in a way that we need to improve upon to get ready for the NCAA tournament. Because we're going to face somebody who does something different, right? And I always try to make that connection, especially if it's a team we know we're going to beat, right? Yeah. So trying to get better at something, and adjusting what you do a little bit, right? Is important throughout the season, with the understanding that if you're playing for March, right, you're not only like you have to adjust in our level, you have to adjust from Friday to Saturday.
Yeah.
Right. And, the first year we went to the NCAA tournament, there was one adjustment that I didn't make the second day that I regretted, that I should have made. It was just who was setting the ball screen.
Just simple. That's simple, right?
Yeah, but it was an in-game adjustment, I should say, but it's something I probably should have seen on film, Yeah. I think, and again, I was only in my third year, so I don't know, was I a good coach? Yeah. Was I a great coach? No. You're always learning, but I think understanding and making the connection of like game to game, where you can adjust what you do and make the connection between that and March, is an important one for me. I think that's important at a low major, mid major, right? Because they're literally, the regular season is all about nothing. You're going to go to the conference tourney, and that decides. The regular season is, did I do a good enough job to keep my job, right? And then the postseason is, we need to win this thing because only one of us goes, right?
Did I
And
do a good enough job to keep my job? That's so true.
yeah, I mean, I think
It's
it's like,
got to be a motivator for a lot of coaches out there. You have to see that at times, right? You don't want to call people out on it, but that is a motivator. It's a
yeah,
fearful motivation,
it's
right?
a
Like, but
fearful motivation, but I
it's
think
human.
it's not at our level. We get, you got to be pretty bad probably to get fired from a lot of our jobs at D3, but there is that component, right? If it's you want to put a good product on the floor, you got to win enough, but like, let's face it, whether it's right or wrong, you're often judged by getting to March Madness and doing something there, right? Like St. Peter's was what, 5th place in the MAC, right? And
But if that, right? Yeah, I guess they were. Yeah, they
I
were.
think they were 5th place. I mean, it wasn't like, listen, the MAC's a tough league for its own reasons, but it ain't that good, right? That a 5th place team, like, they're not going to have an at-large bid for their first place. Like, Iona couldn't even get an at-large bid.
Iona, yep.
Right. So I think the point being, it depends who you are. It depends who you have. But there always is this connection between the next game and who we want to be. To me, that's the most important thing. Who we want to be, in where we want to get to, and who we want to be. Right. So our team just entered the top 25. Yeah, I mean, I don't give a rip about top 25. It's a nice little acknowledgement, but we wanted to be there 2.5 months ago. What are we talking about? We wanted to be there 2 months ago. We wanted to start the season 8-0, and then if we would have been top 10, right?
Yeah.
Well, we didn't get to do that. So then there's the other component about manage the season. You got to manage the season you have, right? You can't manage. I don't come up with a game plan for the season. The way we talk about it is, there's no perfect script to the great season, right? There's no script. There's no one script to the great season that you want to have.
It's usually the script usually makes sense in the end. It's like, you look at our year. We lost our Sweet 16 year. We lost to Northwestern late in the season. We thought that it was almost over. We almost lost to Michigan in the first round of the Big Ten tournament.
Yes, and it ends with this great thing. The season was a struggle. But I'd also say that when you say there's no script, it's also like the season you want to have, you might not get to have.
Yeah.
I feel that all the time. I pray for health more than anything else, because it's like,
injuries.
If a couple injuries come in, I probably don't enjoy having this great team I got enough, because I just know anything can happen. Marcelo sprained his ankle a little bit yesterday. He should be okay, but still, that kind of stuff. That kind of stuff can happen. And that ruined our season last year in some respects. COVID and injuries. So instead of being, I was a miserable 23-6. Thinking like, I'm not just trying to be greedy, but I'm like, no, I thought I had a 26-4 team or something like that. So you got to manage the season you have, and that kind of presents itself along the way. And you don't know how it all ends. But, I've had a couple seasons, one season in particular before COVID. We didn't have a healthy week until February. And then all of a sudden we rolled and made a nice little run to, almost make the championship. I looked back and went, I could have done some things better, but geez, we held it together.
Yep.
We finally got people healthy. We made a little run. We probably were good stewards of that season. So you got to manage the season you have. And fans don't always understand that. Actually, fans usually don't understand at all. It's very week to week. It's Monday morning quarterback. But it's like, that's where, remember when we talked about that in the radio show, we need to do our own, like, let's break down a press conference of someone. Yeah. And let me tell you what they're actually thinking. We just tell us what this is what they actually want to say.
Well, you and I do that already.
We got to hear the questions, right? We got to hear the questions.
You and I do that already. Let me tell you
the real answer to that question.
Yeah. Well,
I want to do that. I want to do that. I want to be the guy to do it. Like, hey, what happened tonight? Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I mean, listen, my guy, so-and-so, number 15 on my team, he's awesome. He stunk tonight. What are you talking about? That's why we lost. He was terrible. What do you want me to do? He's our second best player, and he was terrible. Don't ask me dumb questions. He stunk. I know he stunk. He's my guy. He'll be ready to go on Wednesday.
You almost have to re-ask the question.
Wouldn't that be great?
That's not the question. This is the real question. Why was so-and-so so bad tonight. That's because that's what I'm trying to figure out too. Like, but it's like you can't really say that. That's just not of the things in terms of managing a season. You talk about like manage the season you have, but within that, there are things that are your controllables. Of the things that you can control, what is a constant or a consistent that you have to manage throughout? At least prioritized on your list.
That's a good question. I think one of them would be really staying true to what you say your core identity is,
So
right?
consistency, communication and consistency.
Yeah, I think that's a big component is like when I come up with a game plan, it has to be true to who I say we are.
Yeah.
I can't just say we got to win this game. Therefore, I did that one time, right? Versus Stockton, my second year, I had 2 big injuries, 3 maybe. I was missing 2 of our top scorers. And I was like, fine, we'll play half court D. Let's try to battle and get it. I was miserable. And I was on the bench. Asked Tom McMillan, our assistant coach. I was like, you mark my words, I will never do this again. I will lose by 30
told me that
before I ever do this again. I will play my 13th, 14th guy and make him, who knows, maybe he would have had a great night that night. Forget it. We're running and because this team was a run and gun team. I was building the program to be a run and gun team. Who cares? Wait. Oh, we lost by 5. I didn't feel any better.
Yeah.
Lose by 20. I don't care. We're never playing this way again because it wasn't true to who I said we were.
Yeah.
Right. So the second component, though, is, I think this is true at every level because I try to do some pretty creative things, I think, in the preseason to prep my team for different styles of play. So how are we going to speed up this team? How are we going to disrupt this team? How are we going to adjust our defense here without, messing ourselves up? You still can't do it because you play against yourself every day in practice. Yeah. And we're a very attack-oriented team. So we try to practice to say when the team wants to slow down, and we're like, all right, you guys got to slow down. We're so bad at it. Yeah. We can't even slow down. My kids are all attack-oriented. Like, I'm open. What are you talking about, coach? I'm like, oh, yeah, sorry, coach. I forgot. We're the slow team. They can't do it.
Yeah.
So you need to play opponents to hone in game plans. And the one thing about game plans, and I think, I was talking about Elijah's team who had a good game tonight. It's personnel, man. It's personnel. It's a discipline to know who is that guy? How should I guard him? What should I do? What's our game plan here? And executing it, right? It's taking the stuff you put on the board, and I don't even overload the stuff on the board, right? Simple, same principles, but specific application to that game. That has to improve tremendously throughout the season, right? And sometimes you get it wrong, right? But the way even last night's a good example. I would redo that over. They still might score 87, but if I had to redo it over, we would have scored 125, right? Yeah. If I had to redo my game plan.
Yep.
Yeah. So just we were guarding we were guarding their offense, and I'm like, why am I doing this? We have things to do that takes you out of your offense. I could have done that. But I wanted us to work on something. I was probably a little like, we need to work on this. Maybe we could have worked on something else. But the reality is, like, the execution of the things you read on the board onto the court, that's what separates great teams.
Yeah.
And when we've had a few games this year where I just looked at the guys and I'll check things off after the game and go, you did this, you did this, you did this, you did this. You took this information, you took this game plan, and you made it happen on the court, and that's why you just won by 25. Now, I've also had games where I come down at halftime and I lose it a little bit and go, you didn't do these things, right? That was a lot of struggle early in the year, is like, you have to execute these things the way we want to. And we had that conversation today. About our game this weekend. There's adjustments we need to make for this specific team and personnel that if we can execute and do those things, and they're usually, in my players' defense, they're not easy. They're usually conceptual. They're principle-based. They're not just details of Like we used
Which
to
is
walk
harder to
through
understand
everything.
why as a player. Those are the harder things to understand the
Yeah,
why
yeah,
piece.
yeah. Because it's big picture stuff about like the way we trap, for example, is like it depends on the game how we do it, but sometimes we do it poorly and it looks bad, and it's like it's not going to kill us, but it could later on. So like, there's another principle for you, right? I've coached our last 2 games. I didn't coach those games. I'm coaching other games in my brain, right?
Yes.
I'm pushing
Yeah.
my guys to say, yo, and on Saturday we did it really well. We didn't just play Ramapo. We played an NCAA tournament team who plays defense like that and disrupts. We needed to play offense like that, a certain kind of way because of spacing and whatever. They play defense different than the team we played last night, who plays defense. So you're constantly trying, and to me, the key to that is just connecting that to the larger story of maximizing our potential.
Yep.
And getting to where we want to go. Of course, we want to win the game on Saturday, but we also want to improve so we have a better chance of winning the game in the first or second round and third or fourth round of the NCAA tournament.
All right, so let's get to a couple final thoughts. First one for me. In this conversation, I talk so much about players and feel and why European players just translate immediately. They have a better feel for the game, how to play the game. Coaches have to have feel too, right? I mean, we're talking about managing a season, managing a team, maintaining the rhythm of the season. You have to have a really good feel for your group, right? Really good feel for the individuals to be able to succeed at that as a coach. And I think it's something like we say players and the feel on the floor, but coaches really have to have a feel and a pulse for their team. That's got to be a big piece of it, right?
Yeah, and it's hard. It's hard. Yeah, it would be nice to have an off season. I don't have an off season.
Yeah. Well, even more so when you say what your team's motto, diversity and unity, correct?
Yeah, because
time would be.
It takes time.
Helpful.
It's slow. Yeah. When we talk about slow cooking, like it'd be cool.
Fast playing, slow cooking.
Yeah, and it would be cool to have a summer, right? And I probably would approach a summer or fall workouts differently than most coaches. Like, I would just want to watch my guys. I'd want to watch my guys play and put different puzzles in front of them and see how they solve them because, I think the best coaching you watch guys learn about their team through listening, right? So I learn about my team by watching them play, but I don't get to watch them play until we get started, essentially.
But you're talking human dynamics. You're taking social dynamics, people dynamics.
Well, yeah, it's like I might be familiar with the individual itself, but when you add these new ingredients in the mix, so I have to spend the first 3 to 4 to 6 to 8 weeks, at least the way I coach, right? Because I want to let guys play, but I'm not just letting guys play. I'm trying to teach them how to play.
Yeah, you have boundaries.
Together. Yeah, but they're pretty loose boundaries, but the principle is you play good basketball together. And hey, you got a good matchup. He's got a better matchup. You take advantage of that. That's maturity. That's professionalism. That's old man wisdom, right?
Yeah.
When you want to teach kids how to play that way, well, it's not enough to just say, oh, I watched this kid on film. I know who he is. You do know maybe the core of who he is, but once you start throwing different puzzles against guys, for example, one of my guys, Marcellus, we knew he was going to be a great offensive player. Well, when he came to us and I start chucking puzzles at him and we're full court pressing and I want you to trap here and rotate here, his instincts are great in those situations. Like no one would have told me that he was a great defender like that. Well, why? He had nobody had given him a shot.
Yeah.
He grew up just playing half court D, over helping like every high school does. And now we're teaching them, no, I want you to look and trap here and rotate here and look for steals here. And when you put that before players, they start showing you, if you're willing to listen, they show you what they're capable of. And then you have to adjust because that's where the adjustment piece comes in.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the level up to them in a way.
Yeah. And they learn to adjust to each other. But the way I do it, at least, is these just constant conversations of like reminding them not only who that person, not who you are, right? If I'm talking to you, hey, this is your area of contribution. This is where you're great. This is what you do best. This is the best thing you can do for this team, right? But also, this is how he fits in with you. This is what he does well. So you're constantly educating them on who they are individually, personally, but also who the other guys are too, and how the puzzle pieces kind of all fit together. And it's not as neat and easy. A lot of coaches just want to say, this is your puzzle piece fit with everyone else. No, somebody's give them a chance to surprise you, and you can adjust the puzzle. So that's where I think the listening factor comes in, and that is harder to do at a higher level. I get that. But I think there's a way to do it that could lead to, I call the real magic. That's when the real magic happens, is when, 2019, we got to the NJAC finals and I didn't call a single play.
Yep.
I love games where I didn't have to call a single thing.
You won the championship on a play that you really didn't call. You didn't call timeout, right?
No, it was just a one-on-one.
Went to Duran, he slipped, got the switch, attack.
Yeah, and the great part of that, Maddie Green, who I saw tonight, hit the game winner. And if I had called timeout and controlled the game, I would have put somebody in there for him.
Yes.
Yep.
That's hilarious.
That's just the whole.
But if he missed that shot, fans would say, "Why was he in the game at that point?" Not considering the fact, right? Remember that?
It wasn't that bad because, Maddie loves the moment.
No,
right?
Think about the higher level, right? It's Michigan State against Purdue. Well, Purdue scores at the very end. Well, why don't they double? Well, they hadn't doubled all game. That's not what they did. So
and it's also they could have doubled and something else would have happened. Like it just nothing. There's 10 other things that would have happened, and you could say, "Oh, if I control this, it'll be better." But that's an episode for us. Right.
All right, wait, what's that? Say that one again.
Everyone thinks that if I try to control the situation, I make it better. But really, you more often than not, you make it worse. Yeah. When the coach comes in and intercedes, remember the classic, I'm going to call timeout and set up a play. And instead of them getting off a good shot, which they would have done in 7 seconds without the timeout, they come out of the timeout. They have difficulty inbounding the ball. They run the play. It doesn't work, and there's a shot clock violation. Yeah. And no one sits back and goes, why'd you call the timeout in the first place? Yeah. Because the coaches are incentivized to enter into the game too much, to do too much, not too little, right? We are incentivized by our press conferences and everything else to do more than we should, right? And sometimes I maybe should do more. But, I like to find out what's the least amount I can do here and see players solve problems. And I think that's part of the fun. And
that might be another conversation too.
It's a definite another conversation.
How you change that? How do you change that in college basketball? Coaches, in a way, interjecting into the game, which again, it's not said in a nasty way. It's not like, how dare these dumb coaches? It's not the case. I think, but there is a point where it's too much, right? You call timeout because you have to use it or lose it. You allow that defense to now switch, and now you're like, I just drew a play for a different defense. How often do you see that?
Yes,
that's right. That all the time.
That's right. And it's like you could have just called 3, and you had some play that would have been fine, or you could have called nothing, and you would have been that. Before I ever coached, that this is let's save this for another day, but when I would always play, it's like my assumption was the play usually didn't work, right? Like coaches know each other well. It's usually a player making a play. Put the player in a position to make a play. And then sometimes it goes in, sometimes it doesn't, but put him in a position where he can do something well. My assumption is usually like if I call something, it's because I know it's going to work, right? But usually when you call something, the whole thing slows down.
Work means offensively you get a good look. Doesn't mean you make a shot.
Yeah, right? You get a good look. You gain an advantage.
You gain an
advantage, which leads to a pretty good shot.
Hey, what about getting into your book next? Can we do that? Offense wins.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
I just think it's funny.
Maybe we should wait until we have more listeners. I'll sell a few more copies.
Maybe we should wait till we have more listeners and you have more wins. And you stop giving up 80 plus to a team that's averaging 58. Although maybe that's another one to talk
We're
about.
fifth in the country in scoring.
But also you got to give up something if you want to play that way. And I think Arizona's like that. And they run a little risk at times where it's like you do have to give up something to get the pace. Gonzaga does that a lot. It's the be better at us at what we do best approach. I love it, but
we need to talk about this because we've reached our time limit. But there's very few. Everyone thinks that it's empowering to have confidence you can get stops. That is true. It's more empowering when you know you can score. Ooh, that's the most powerful thing is you can't stop me, right? And that's how we grew up playing the game. I want my players thinking that of like, you know what? Even, you know, when you're playing a team and it's hard when defense is way harder when scoring is easier for you. That's a fact. And coaches forget about that. I remind my guys about that all the time. It takes serious discipline to play great D when you're a great scoring team. Very, very hard to do because you're like, come on, man, get this. I mean, you remember?
Yeah.
That's how we split a game. Go ahead, take one. You ain't outscoring us, right? I don't want to play that way.
Yep.
Right. But it's hard not to when you're used to, we average 93 right now. It's, you know, and that's a whole nother conversation though, too, about where's your advantage, tempo, all this other stuff that, you know, we were just talking about as a staff. So part of the season, I think that's good for today.
It is good for today. So what does that mean we're going to next? I actually like the conversation about the mentality, the confidence, the you know, humble arrogance, whatever you want to call it. That's great. You can't stop us. Yes. How do you find that? But also as a coach, how do you, in a way, empower your team to, I don't know, embody that? That might be the challenge. So maybe we'll get into that next. Let's get into that next.
Let's get into that. And the first answer is, that's how I roll. Right? That's me.
Easy.
Yeah,
it
well,
is. Look, coaches got to coach to their personality.
Yeah,
You've got to be it. If you want players to embody it, you have to embody it yourself. So we'll get into that next. I don't even know what to call it, but it's pretty much fun. Joe being Joe and trying to turn his players into him. So we'll get into that next. It's Coach and the Commentator. Thanks, folks.